Barbara gonna come down? Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, so I was just talking to Heather about RFP. I gave my comments to Henry this morning.
Oh,
Asked him to kind of rearrange a few things, modify a couple things.
Okay.
So I was talking with Heather about what they're doing, like, maybe it's like an intersection kind of.
Well, I did have a feel about timing stuff on that.
Okay.
And I told him, it ain't happening in October. Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That's ridiculous. I'd say we're not gonna make some.
Yeah, so we're talking like October, and November.
Month is not gonna. This is not a deadline issue, right? The money is. So we have fun. That's fine. But it's, you know,
Yeah, if we do a 90-day from February,
right. Well, I'm just saying, if you want. Okay, what I was gonna say, if you have board, potential board date for November, you can have Henry go back in and look at those dates, and he just says whatever it is.
Okay. Okay.
You can take another look at that, because I think he didn't have anything on the distributor.
Yeah, I'll tell him that, and then go ahead and setting up a building workshop or whatever, and schedule here,
Okay.
but we can go ahead and get a slot.
Okay.
So I'll go talk to you.
Okay. If you want, I mean, I've got the board letter right now in your folder, which Tracy got inside of our folder, whatever that is, just like board stuff. I got, if you wanted to start taking a look, maybe out of the first, I didn't do very much. You can just start seeing if you've got any ideas or just general stuff, like maybe we should have a discussion about something, maybe we need to add such and such.
Or probably get pretty close to it.
Right, well, that'll be, September 6th or something.
Okay, yeah, I'll look at it.
For November, yes.
Yeah.
It's like a 2-week thing, right? Because you need to have that for the set.
Okay.
So it's October, it'll be September.
Yeah, I guess it got rained off some days ago.
That's good. We can take it right. The other thing is, we want to get from Kelly. Nah, it's premature right now. It's premature. I realize it's kind of late. So we have this group that's doing that one cap and trade amount of money to invest in EJ areas for weatherization and energy efficiency.
Okay.
Of course, it's all great.
Right.
It pans out nicely for the GHGs, not so much on the NOx unless you make sure we have NOx stuff. But we talked and we fixed it and said, if you can do like solar thermal or a higher efficiency boiler there, we can get some reductions. You know.
What about also solar for battery storage? That was one of the things I was going to have them modify for battery storage, including solar. You know, could be with without, but
you have to do that in concert with the compliance, right? So it's one thing to like have the battery to run, let's say, light bulbs, but that isn't very much actually. It's got to run a NOx reducer piece of appliance. So like, let's say a pool heater, or you know, or your space heaters, and of course the ultimate which we're trying to get is the replacement of an older one, right? Because that's what you get your more benefit of, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Obviously, they're replacing something brand new.
Yeah, and I need to talk to them about that. We've got 11 listed on there. And I need to talk to them because we had a meeting today. We're going to have an internal meeting this afternoon where it looks like with Shaw and Anthony, they've developed a model that shows about mitigation to be self-sustaining for retail. So if that was the case, then truly that 13 million is available to be used for projects, because moving forward, it would sustain itself with what we're expecting coming next year.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So if we can do that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, it's a growing, it's a continuous.
Yeah, so we think we're actually in pretty good shape. You guys came up with a good model. Because nobody else was, I mean, they wouldn't give us any information. They just said, oh, what does that do? And they did some.
Yeah.
So I think that should work. Yeah. Okay. All right, man.
Yeah, okay, great.
Good luck with the workshop.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Hey.
Will, General Coatings, RCMA.
How's it going?
Good, thanks. Yeah. Appreciate the opportunity. And then you've got another meeting tomorrow, right?
Oh, well, the funding.
Yeah, but I mean,
Or
it's,
the
but still, it's kind of relevant to the same 1168 and stuff.
Oh, the girls might be having another one from the
Yeah. No, I understand. I was like, like 2 days in a row. It's like, okay.
Well, another one of my group is like they're doing a bunch of marketing around the batteries and potentially down the So they've used trying to center that workshop. Dude, you're gonna have to make that Tuesday. So we're constantly playing.
So let me ask you a question. How have you guys gone round robin through all these different sort of DOC methods such that you feel confident?
I mean, I know that goes to that much. I don't want to bother that with the lab.
Yeah, but see, one of the complaints that's been with RCMA and some of the methodologies in the lab kind of haven't all come up with the same numbers and haven't been an easy solution for us to really know that, okay, we can use this and it'll be the same, or, all be the same accuracy, if you will. And so we were kind of concerned on the language of that 1168 division that said annual parts that, it seemed
the multiple ones.
Yeah.
We have a problem with that too. So that's actually not very good right now because, yeah, you're not the only person. This is going to be a violation. We don't know what those are that you're claiming because, frankly, I'm not so sure.
Well, we thought it was a little contentious, we was kind of afraid like we were in violation, like we were purposely doing it. We're really all we're trying to find the right method to test it by and just make it compliant. All right.
Yeah, I mean, there are usually where we get like this one. Well, I guess it's that we use other things.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always. It's usually only use like the one test of the four tests. Test it with this one, test it with this other one, and then like one incredible you say, giving us their agrees with the So yeah, so our legal group agrees with that. That's not the issue.
Yeah, we're just trying to find the right one that works and then test by it so we're all in compliance. And no one's looking at these trying to have an issue. So we appreciate you.
Maybe what we'll do with this one, because we're still going to hold the data on that same thing, she'd like to see what legal comes up with that. Maybe what we'll do is we should, we'll just send out that word. Hopefully, I'll try to.
Well, you're trying to work with the lawyer.
We've got to close that. We don't want them to get it because, we don't have to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, there's substantive issues like where the sea levels are, things like that, and reductions proposed there in the time frame. And there's this other part that just sort of kicks it apart. It makes it seem like, okay, well, you've identified more tons, but then you're kind of applying maybe, it just gets a little bit too far. I'm just trying to outline the right method.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to get this thing moving along.
You got it.
Hey, all right, how's it going?
Good, how are you doing? I'll be happy with that. All right, so when this.
Yeah, I have one right after this, and then we can do it.
Yeah, when you say,
after that.
so this, yeah, this stuff.
Yeah. And I have one. Well, I told them to do it 10 to 11, that would be a miracle.
Maybe we can do everything.
Totally.
Okay, so
And I'm
what?
live here. We'll just be, we're totally open, we'll
Yeah.
make contact.
So I think we're trying to support that position, but I think there's some of it that we can make,
How long is that?
but there's some that we think that, like, we're trying to come to a conclusion that, she was, I was talking about, there's some of the things where, I would say, this thing by which
Yeah, that's fine, so we're, yeah, I'm wide open. Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
legitimate one that we all use, rather than one that they say, well, if we did it by this one and this one, it didn't make sense. Normal, what it was like, and then maybe you get back to
Okay, we are streaming. Everything is live. We're going live right now. But hang on. Just 1 second. If you want to make an announcement, you go ahead. Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. If we could take a seat. Just so a reminder, you're here at the 1168 Public Workshop. If you're interested in other rules, that's not 1168, you might not be in the right place. However, this is an exciting project, so if you're not involved or interested, you should stay anyway. So we will be guaranteed to entertain. Okay, we're just waiting for Paul to set us up here on the webcast. This is being webcast, which means that this meeting will be archived. Some are streaming it live if they've got nothing else to do this morning. Otherwise, people will be waiting to enjoy it tonight, over a bottle of Chianti. Okay, all right. I know you drink better wines. Good, Paul? Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Kraus. I'm Planning and Rules Manager here at the South Coast AQMD. Welcome to our headquarters. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Okay, first off, everyone's phones, if you could put those on silent and vibrate. If you do need to take a call, if you could leave the auditorium to take that. If you need to talk, we'd be much appreciative. With regards to restrooms, they're right down the hallway. You probably already possibly have seen those or visited them. If we do have an event of an emergency, please evacuate toward the back of the auditorium. Both exits will serve. If there's a need for a shelter in place, like earthquakes, they always say drop and cover your head and then hold onto your chair. I'm not quite sure these are chairs you necessarily want to hold onto. They're pretty steady, but not a lot of coverage, so I'll let you make do. Anyway, okay, so today is a public workshop. We will be providing a series of presentations up here from different staff members with regards to our appropriate topics of expertise, I would hope. However, we will then open it up to a public comment period for you guys to come up and make public comments here at the dais. And of course, when you're making those public comments, we hope that these are constructive comments for us as we kind of move closer to bringing this proposed rule to our board. Therefore, it'd be helpful if raised voices and profanity, personal attacks, those aren't very helpful. They're fun and entertainment, but they're not very helpful and productive. So we'd appreciate if we would, tone and edit. Okay, so any questions on housekeeping? All right, very good. All right, as you know, the AQMP is tasked to achieve federal and state ambient air quality standards. Those standards one standard, of course, involves ozone. Ozone is a very critical standard because it actually involves two different pollutants, nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds. And in a photochemical reaction in sunlight, they then create the, quote, bad ozone. There are currently, right now, 3 ozone standards in America. And I have to say, all 3 of those standards in our region, we have not met them. So one of those standards is an 80 ppb that's being required to be met by 2023. There is the 75 ppb measure required to be met in 2031. And then, of course, the 2015, the designations will be coming out by the federal government on October 1st. Those designations will tell America what regions are in attainment or not in attainment for the next 70 ppb ozone standards. So these, the challenge for us is that we have these standards that we have not met yet in our region, and they're going to continue to get ratcheted down. So, the efforts like today is just one little piece of the puzzle. And let me tell you what the piece of the puzzle is. Now, we talk about volatile organic compounds. We're talking about a current inventory in our region of 500 tons per day. We are going to need to ratchet these down by 200 tons per day, down to around 300 in order for us to meet that ozone standard. Now, this is all done in a big chemical photogrid model, which we then mix in with nitrogen oxides. There's good news and bad news in all of this. The big number in this particular rulemaking, to put it in perspective, we're seeking around a 1 ton per day reduction. So not, in the scheme of things, something very dramatic. However, we think that when we go into these rulemakings, we go into them with an open mind. We go with them with where there's possible opportunities. We go in with them with attitude about where is it cost effective for industries, how can we make sure that industries aren't super adverse impacted, but where do we think that there's opportunities that this seamless transition could occur, and we can continue to be progressive in our region and meet our goals. Now, good news and bad news. Now, there's another ozone standard we didn't talk about. It's back in 1979, when it all first got started, there was a 1-hour ozone, a different measurement of the way you would measure ozone. That 1-hour standard still also has not been met. That's at 120 ppb. Yes, it's a different number because, again, it's a different measurement. But that standard still has not been met. We are still held to that standard. People talk about it being revoked. It's not just revoked. The court saw this as potential need to demonstrate anti-backsliding, so they said, you still have to meet this standard. That standard needs to be met in 2022. So the bad news for us on that is that we found that the models are super sensitive for VOCs. So unlike the 8-hour, which is the good news, the 8-hour tends to be very sensitive to nitrogen oxide. So we could be more nitrogen oxide dependent and meeting those far off 8-hour standards. But the more sooner standard of 1 hour will really depend on the VOC reduction. So again, this is all part of our goal in seeking. When it comes to the types of VOCs that we're talking about here, area type source volatile organic compounds, these are occurring, again, in area sources, but also in fixed stationary sources. Of our 400 rules at our agency, only about 20 of those actually target those types of sources. So you can kind of see that narrow focus and where we have a lot of work to do. But I think in this context, I like to look at this rule when I took it over a couple months ago here, is to say, wow, there's a lot of cleanup that kind of needs to be done with this rule. And then there's some opportunities that we can work on as we move forward. Okay, now all that babbling, let's move on to something more exciting, the presentation. Okay, this rule was adopted originally in 1989. It was last amended in 2005. However, it was actually before that amendment in 2005, back in 2000, that we actually did ratchet down some of the current control limits, which means we haven't really looked at these limits or these VOCs reductions in 17 years. And we believe there's a lot of opportunities that can be met. This rule does apply to adhesive primers, sealants, and sealant primers. The current inventories, this is interesting. So we look at the AQ&P. AQ&P tends to look at a top-down approach when it comes to inventory. It's around a 4 ton per day inventory. However, when the surveys were done a couple of years ago with this industry, it was estimated that the inventory could be as high as 10.5. And when you do a comparative analysis of what that means, if you think about the architectural coatings, the paintings we all use, the coats and paintings we use every day in homes, commercial and industrial businesses, is around 12. So this adhesive, inventory is actually quite large, and it's frankly, it's quite alarming for us because we didn't anticipate that. But we don't want to seem like that survey was the end all, which is, as you're going to soon see in Nicole's presentation, that we have an interest thus in adding reporting to this rule, because we think it's really critical, both for the industry and for ourselves and for the general public, to kind of know really what we're talking about. Are we being accurate from these surveys or not? And the best way to do that is to have the information reported. This is a growth industry, so when you do look at the AQ&P and you look at the subsequent years moving forward, you do see an increase, and that's primarily due to population, and that's how ARB does that kind of estimation anticipation. We also believe, by the way, in a general sense, in a more cultural sense, there's an increased interest in adhesives and sealants, primarily due to insulation and energy efficiency programs as we continue as a state to move toward greenhouse gas goals. There have been significant advances in technology. We've been meeting along this rulemaking process with manufacturers who had some really insightful new technology, and that's how we sort of crafted what we believe could be some future limitations on some of these products. This process actually did begin back in 2013, and here we provide 2 columns to kind of show you that range of progress. So in 2013, 2014, we did surveys, 8 working group meetings. We did actually 6 drafts of the rule. We did have a staff report that was released. We took in stakeholder comments. We proposed back then about a 4.4 tons per day reduction. That was because it was affecting about 22 categories of adhesives and sealants. But it also was making an assumption that certain chemicals are being used to help with those reformulations. The assumption was that those could be deemed exempt as a VOC compound. Okay, thus you would get a bigger reduction. However, a lot of changes has occurred since then, such as our board policy that is restricting the use of those if there's any publications or suspicion that those have a toxic impact. And so there's what they call the precautionary approach. That whole document is online. You can read all about it in our rules and our board's decision on those things. But it did kind of change the way we looked then going into 2017 as we started working with the working group and the rule, et cetera, now. And because of that, now we're focused more on 14 affected categories, which we believe would generate us a little over 1 ton per day reduction. Again, to not beat the horse here, we are seeking these reductions, of course, to help us meet the standards. Again, there are 2 major standards, more immediate effective standards in 2022 and 2023 that we're seeking to get these reductions. Again, we haven't had any since 2002, any significant reductions from this rule, so therefore we're doing these proposals. At this point, I'll hand it over to Nicole Silva.
All right, thank you, Mike. So my name is Nicole Silva. I'm the AQ specialist, the lead rule writer on this project. I've been leading the other working group meetings. We've had 3 working group meetings, as Mike had stated, and we're going to be going into the proposed changes to the rule in the next sequence of slides that I will be speaking on. I'm going to try to go in the order of the rule, highlighting changes that we've spoken about, highlighting changes that may not necessarily have come up as being highlighted during other working group meetings, but I just wanted to give you that rundown right now. So we're going to start with the purpose and applicability of the rule. We did change the language that begins this rule to try and highlight where our applicability is for products that are adhesives, primers, sealant primers. At one point, during the rule, we did have COX as part of the regulated products. We are retaining that term in the definition of sealants. So when we are referencing the regulated products throughout this rule, COX is still part of it, but just under the definition of sealants. So we are looking to reduce VOC emissions for these products, coming from these products, as well as the toxic air contaminants and stratospheric ozone depleting compounds. We are looking to then modify the language so that it's clear to end users and to manufacturers that this rule does apply for those who sell, store, supply, offer for sale, or manufacture for sale any of these applicable products within our jurisdiction. That language does reflect what's currently in other rules that have been amended since 2005, so we're just trying to make everything seem as if it's along the same lines to create a familiar language. So it also adds language that references the consumer products regulation. There are products that are adhesives and sealants that could be sold within South Coast jurisdiction that may fall under the CPR, but here in the applicability section, we are trying to highlight that the applicability would exclude those products exclusively used for consumer use and institutional use that weigh 1 pound or less or 16 fluid ounces or less and have an applicable VOC limit within the CPR, the Consumer Products Regulation. We did have an exemption for the CPR in the current rule, but we want to clarify the applicability for this rule to help eliminate any kind of gray area that was there. In the preliminary draft staff report, we did include the image on slide number 6, where we were trying to explain that products under 16 fluid ounces could possibly fall under the CPR, and then those above 16 fluid ounces would definitely fall under Rule 1168, provided that they're not aerosol adhesives. Throughout the rule amendment process, we were considering limiting the exemption for aerosol adhesives and aerosol adhesive primers. Since the beginning of the 2017 proposal, we have spoken with CARB and we have discussed that we would be leaving aerosol adhesives and aerosol adhesive primers to CARB's regulatory authority. The Health and Safety Code did allow us to start regulating those, but we've heard from you guys, we understand your concerns, and so for the time being, we're leaving this to CARB CPR. When we're looking at those products under 16 fluid ounces, we did our best in this image to try and state what would fall under the CPR and what would fall under Rule 1168. For all products that are household, institutional, consumer use, under 16 fluid ounces or equal to 16 fluid ounces, those would fall under the CARB CPR, Consumers Products Regulation. But for those products that are exclusively used in industrial settings for manufacturing operations, whether or not you purchase it on a retail shelf, and you may see it as a consumer product because you're a consumer who's purchasing it. If it's used exclusively for industrial use in manufacturing operations, that would fall under the Rule 1168, and as well as any product that is excluded from the CPR, therefore not having an applicable VOC limit in the CPR. The definitions throughout the Consumer Products Regulation explicitly state these products are defined by these terms, and these products are not included in these definitions. And so that would then cover those products that are not included within those definitions. And looking in our definition sections of our rule, we did have a major overhaul in this section to try and clarify the rule language as best we could in taking into consideration stakeholders' feedback. We've deleted definitions that restate dictionary definitions that really provide no additional insight. So we're also trying to revise definitions so that they would be more consistent with the Ozone Transport Commission model rule as well as CARB CPR. We added definitions of terms for categories that are now referenced in the rule and that have new VOC limits. And we've also added definitions to assist with the understanding of applicability, administrative requirements, or, like I said, categories listed within our VOC table of standards. In the rule, it's referenced as Table 1. This is to give you an idea of how many additions we've had that are simply to clarify terms within the rule. We do have 27 definitions that were added for clarity. And looking to slide number 9, we have 11 new categories that were added for definitions defining what's in Table 1, as well as on slide number 10, no, here we go. Slide number 10, we have listed all those that were deleted or substituted. And I highlight substituted because I know one concern is what happened to sheet-applied rubber lining operations. We have those products that now fall under the rubber vulcanization adhesive term. So we did highlight that in the preliminary draft staff report. I just also wanted to highlight that now. For those products or terms that were revised, we have 30 terms that were revised, many for which to clarify what falls under a certain definition, to take into consideration the fact that we've changed a key term. Instead of listing out adhesive primer, sealant primer for infinite amount of times in this rule, we've changed it to just be regulated products. So a lot of these definitions were revised for that purpose, as well as other portions of the rule to reference this regulated products term. In looking to the requirements, one of the key changes is that we removed C1 in the current version of the rule, which had that default category for adhesives, adhesive primers, adhesive bonding primers, even though adhesive bonding primers was removed from our definition section, that said that if you were one of these categories that were not listed in our table of standards, you would fall to the default 250 grams per liter. Now, there is concern that we've added these other categories within the table that came out of nowhere or is unfair to the stakeholders to include. But really, those other categories are taking place of this default section that was originally in the rule. And particularly for the non-membrane sealants, that it was then replaced by other roof sealants, that non-membrane term was removed from the rule, and we've added other roof sealants as well as other roof adhesives in the rule instead in the table. And so we did change the layout for the table of standards, that table 1 referenced in the rule. The way that the 2005 version of the rule prints out, it was not clear that one of the clauses for the substrate-specific adhesives actually applied to substrate-specific adhesives. So we tried to change the format of the table so that it mimicked other VOC rules that we have, and to assist with clarifying what is truly applicable to which categories. Slide 13 is an overview in the same format that we've seen in different working group meetings to highlight the changes to the VOC limits. For those that are in red, they are new categories. We do have, again, the understanding that if it's an adhesive that didn't have a limit previously, that it would be that default 250 during the current 2005 version. And so we have highlighted here those that may have issue, for instance, for the plastic welding, that the change or the proposed limit may be impacted by ASTM changes and the feasibility of those. For products that were previously sold under the 55 gallon per year exemption, which was the top and trim and the rubber vulcanization adhesive, we are removing those from that exemption due to their higher VOC limits that are being implemented upon adoption. Rubber vulcanization adhesive would have 850, and top and trim would come back to 540. But in receiving comments from stakeholders, there was a request to include a technology assessment for top and trim, because we are still looking to maintain SIP equivalency by bringing that limit back down to 250 grams per liter in 2023. We also have a tech assessment for foam sealants in 2023 for that 50 grams per liter limit that we are proposing. Again, receiving stakeholder feedback, the limits that are in this table, specifically that you're looking at, are reflective of the rule that was released on July 21st. But one note that I want to point out is we would be looking to remove the upon adoption for foam sealants at 200 to be 250. So we did receive stakeholder feedback regarding that. I just wanted to point that out, that you will be seeing that in the version of the rule that will be coming out. For other products, again, they're highlighted in this table as reflected in the current version of the rule that we have out from July 21st. Continuing on to the requirements of the rule, we did, again, change the table layout as well as add a section for regulated product categorization. And in this regulated product categorization section, we were addressing the most restrictive clause that we referenced, that if a product is marketed or sold for a certain use, but it could be applicable to another category, that the VOC limit for the lower category would apply to determine compliance. Lower VOC limit would apply. In this section, we also have included that substrate-specific clause that was previously hidden between the tables in the 2005 version, where if it's for substrate-specific adhesive, then it would be for the higher VOC limit would apply if there were multiple substrate-specific categories that were applicable. Continuing on to slide 15. Again, we changed language for clarity's purpose. So for solvent cleaning being subject to Rule 1171, that's already in the rule. We just modified that paragraph so that it would be written better. And as for the transfer efficiency section, we did move the viscosity section to our exemptions. For control devices, we did change the percentage of VOC emission efficiency from 80% to 90 or 95% according to all the equipment on site versus just one particular piece of equipment on site. And that's to comply with the reasonably available control technology and measures that are already in play through the CTG. So, in continuing on to slide 16, we did modify the language for disposal of regulated products in VOC-laden cloth. Again, for clarification, I just wanted to highlight that since it was not something that we've gone over explicitly in our working group meetings. But we have gone over the prohibition of storage for products that are on site, that they must be for compliant use. So we do have a clause here saying that if you store a product on site that is above our VOC limits for any of the categories, that would be a violation of this rule. So we've also included a comment for this section in regards to mixing, that these containers must be stored as closed containers unless you are physically mixing the products themselves. One aspect of the rule that we've gone over in length are the test methods. I just wanted to highlight the test methods that were added to this rule and reference to the rule. Method 24 is already in there, as well as method 304 and 303 were already referenced in the rule, but 313, 6886 were added. Method 316A and B are already in the rule, but language is clarified, and subpart PPPP of 40 CFR Part 63 was also added. There was also language added in reference to equivalent test methods and multiple test methods. We are reviewing the language for multiple test methods, taking into consideration stakeholders' concerns, but we will be proposing to retain our equivalent test method language that has been added to the rule. When we look into the administrative requirements section that has been added to the rule, we have one section for labeling and one section for reporting. For the labeling, effective January 1st, 2019, we are looking to have these containers labeled with the date code for these products. We are proposing a sell-through clause within this rule, so that would help with that. But those that aren't required to comply with our labeling requirements would be products that are subject to the Consumer Products Regulation, or products that have capacities of 1 fluid ounce or less. Products that are 1 fluid ounce or less are exempted from our rule, or are being proposed to be exempted from our rule. There are specific labeling requirements depending on which VOC category your product falls under. And that would include these higher VOC niche categories that we've been proposing. For top and trim, it currently has a 250 grams per liter limit, but since we are looking to increase that limit to 540 for the time being until 2023, we do want that label to explicitly say that this is a top and trim adhesive. Rubber vulcanization adhesive has a limit of 850, and so again, we're looking for that label for that reason. And those two specific categories are being proposed to be exempted or removed from the exemption for the 55 gallon per year. So that's also important for that exemption clause. And then the last two are, again, because of the high VOCs for those products. In looking into the reporting, we've come a long way from our proposal and what we've originally hoped to include in this rule of annual reporting. But we have taken into consideration stakeholder feedback and devised a plan in which we would have reporting every 3 years until 2025, and then every 5 years thereafter, also hearing stakeholders' concerns and their desire to have a sunset date, which we are proposing to be in 2040. And so these reporting requirements would be included for manufacturers and private labelers, as well as big box retailers and distribution centers. We recognize that this industry is not familiar with having to separate their sales specifically for our jurisdiction, and that it is a hard task to see being implemented. So big box retailers and distribution centers would then have to report back to the manufacturer or the private labeler the products that would be shipped into the district to assist with the manufacturer and private labeler requirement for reporting. Now, the only annual reporting that we're proposing at this time is for those end users that are utilizing the 55 gallon per year exemption. We want to make sure that those companies that are using this exemption understand that the top and trim will not be included, as well as the rubber vulcanization adhesives, and their reporting would have to demonstrate that as well. In looking at the timeline that we're proposing, and forgive the color scheme on this, I did not realize the defaults. That first column on the left would be for manufacturers and private labelers. Your report would be due September 1st of the reporting years, as stated every 3 years and then every 5 years until that sunset date. For the big box retailers and distribution centers, we want to give manufacturers a chance to receive that information, so big box retailers and distribution centers would have to submit their reports by May 1st to the manufacturer and private labeler for the reported years listed in this table as that right column. I just wanted to list out, these are the pieces of information on slide 21 that we would be looking to receive from manufacturers and private labelers. One note I want to make is that although it was mentioned in the preliminary draft staff report, it was missed in the rule language that was from 7/21/2017, that the product type would also be included in this report. We do want to know if it's water-based or solvent-based so that we can make our evaluations and understand, what product technologies are out there. So that would be included, and we will be looking to include a template on our website, both for the big box retailers as well as the manufacturers and private labelers, including all this information so that you know what is required for this reporting. Now, although we did not continue on with our proposal for a limited exemption for aerosol adhesives, we still want to know what kind of information and what kind of quantity of products as aerosol adhesives and aerosol adhesive primers are coming into our jurisdiction. And so we are proposing a reporting according to the same schedule, that table 2 schedule that we just saw, with this information. Recognizing that aerosol adhesives are reported in % weight according to CPR's requirements, you can still report your products in percent weight and even in total weight. It's just that we would like to know the container size of the product and the information on the product that's coming into our jurisdiction. Again, recognizing how difficult it may be to separate out what would be coming into our jurisdiction, we would be considering allowing the volumes to be estimated based off of population, specifically for the aerosol adhesives and aerosol adhesive primer report. Continuing on, we do have a prohibition of sales section within our rule, in which, just to highlight, those products that are reasonably assumed to be subject to the CARB CPR or products that are sold outside of our jurisdiction, those will not have to comply with our prohibition of sale, since they would not be coming into or be applicable to this rule. But for all products that do fall under this rule, you would have to adhere to this section, which also includes our proposal to exempt or to prohibit the use of Group 2 exempts, and even give a sunset date for prohibition of sale for those products containing methylene chloride, which would be January 1st, 2021. In looking to our exemption section of the rule, we have modified the language regarding this CARB CPR applicability to exclude maintenance and repair. Now, the current regulation just states that if you're have products that are subject to the CPR, then you shall not have to comply with the parts of this rule. But we wanted to make sure that the applicability and the exclusion is highlighted. As we stated, we changed the applicability in the beginning of the rule. We also modified the language regarding the CPR exemption, so that you know that for products that are being used in a stationary source for stationary manufacturing, that would be subject to this rule, excluding those products that are for maintenance and repair. We were proposing a streamlined record-keeping option for those products that are 20 grams per liter or less. So for those end users, end users that currently have to comply with Rule 109 that's in the rule, all record keeping is still according to SCAQMD Rule 109, but for those products that are 20 grams per liter per less, we would be streamlining those record keeping options. And as stated before, we would be excluding the top and trim category, as well as the rubber vulcanization adhesive category from the 55-gallon per year exemption. We were originally proposing in the current version of the rule that you've seen, current proposal of the rule that you've seen, to have a January 1st, 2018 date, but we did receive a request to extend that 1 year. So we are considering a January 1st, 2019 date for that exclusion of those two products. We also have amended the exemption for including regulated products shipped out of the SCAQMD jurisdiction. This particular section was in the prohibition of a sale and use section, where we were stating that if you're a manufacturer, or if you're a manufacturer or supplier that has product that is above a VOC limit that's stated in our rule, but it's for shipment out of the jurisdiction, you would have to notify us of that or have letters demonstrating that. And you have to maintain those letters for up to 3 years. We are moving the exemption to the exemption section, as opposed to being in the prohibition of sale section that you currently see in our proposal. Since we added a clause regarding distribution centers having to report, we just wanted to explicitly state that if you're a distribution center that ships products outside of our jurisdiction, therefore not within SCAQMD jurisdiction, you would also be exempt from this rule. And we have added exemptions that were there since the 2013 proposal in regards to dry mix and field installation and repair of potable water linings. And then I will pass this on to, just go ahead.
Sorry, Nicole. Great job. Thank you very much. Okay, so something I missed, that's actually introducing the panel that we have here. So you guys want to introduce yourselves and the role you play in this rule?
Yes. Morning. This is Shaw Debirian with the Socioeconomic section.
Morning, my name is Barbara Radline, Program Supervisor, CEQA.
This is Vera Tiagi from our legal department. And now, most important, introducing.
Hi, I'm Heather Farr. I'm the Program Supervisor for the VOC Rules team. I'll be continuing the presentation from here, starting on slide 26 with stakeholder concerns. And first, I want to thank all the stakeholders, thank you, for providing comments to us and providing them in a timely manner. They were very helpful. We received many comment letters. And again, it's really helping us in the rule process to hone the rule language and to work on a consensus so the district can achieve our goals and the industry can still comply. So starting with slide number 6, one comment that we've received is that the district is expanding the scope of 1168 to regulate products that were typically regulated at the state level under the California Air Resources Board Consumer Product Regulation. So, the 1168 does already include many consumer products. Pipe cements, this is a consumer product that have just been typically regulated at the district level, not at the state level. A lot of the roofing products have been typically regulated at the local level instead of at the state level. So we don't look at this that we're increasing our authority or overstepping our regulatory authority. One of the concerns has been that we have a catch-all category or an other category that will catch any product that is not currently regulated at the state level, but that's always been the case in the rule. We've always had this default limit of 250. Pretty much the rule started out with having just one limit for adhesives and sealants, and it was at 250. And from there, we carved out specialty categories, some at a higher VOC limit, some at a lower VOC limit. But because that default limit was kind of in a paragraph in front of all the tables, it wasn't very clear. So for clarity, we just created a category, we added it to the table, that we have this other limit that is a catch-all. So if you don't have a specialty limit, then you're going to fall under the other. So this is not an expansion. This is how we've always interpreted our rule. Another comment, which Nicole's already touched on, is the proposal to limit aerosol usage in the exemption. We have changed that. We're going back to a complete exemption, but we're maintaining the reporting part of this so we can understand what the emissions inventory is. So the next bullet is to provide accurate sales volume for aerosol adhesives and primers. A concern was that the manufacturers would like to just be able to take all the state's sales volume and take about 45% based on population and report what is sold in our jurisdiction. And we're considering that because there is the same limit, the limits are consistent throughout California, we think we'd get pretty accurate data that way. The last bullet on this slide is to include CARB method 310 for measuring the VOC content of aerosols. And since we're taking out the exemption, we think that we don't have to include this method in there. We're pretty sure that takes away this issue. We would like to have further conversation with the stakeholders if this is a concern, but we don't think we need CARB method 310. We do still have, so aerosol adhesives are being exempted, but we still have an inclusion for aerosol sealants. And for that, there really is no test method up at the state level. CARB 310 won't cover that. Our lab is working on a developmental method to test the VOC content of those products. They're a very unique product. That VOC limit doesn't go into effect for 5 years, so we have some time to work on that method. And we have a technology assessment so we can see where we are before we hit that 5-year mark. Next slide, slide number 27. We've gotten a lot of comments that the reporting requirements are too burdensome, and we've really tried to work with the stakeholders. This information is really critical for planning staff for us to really understand what the emissions inventory is. As Mike Krause mentioned, we initially thought the inventory for these products were around 4.1 tons per day, and the survey that we did in 2013, 2014 was really enlightening. It showed that the inventory was much higher than we previously had estimated, even getting to the point to rival the emissions for architectural coatings, which has typically been thought to be the largest area sources of emissions for VOCs. So as the VOCs have come down for architectural coatings, these products have not been, the VOC limits haven't changed in about 17 years. So we're really looking to get some better inventory information. And we did adjust the reporting frequency to allow for more time. We're hoping for reporting every 3 years, moving on to every 5 years and a sunset date. So this information is very critical. So this is something that staff feels is very important for our planning needs. The comment was received that it's difficult to accurately report the sales into the district. Products that are used for adhesives and sealants are sold in many different locations, from gas stations to hardware stores. They're ubiquitous sales. So there's concern that once you send your product to a distribution hub, then you won't know where it ends up, if it is sold in the district or outside the district. So we did add reporting requirements for big box retailers and distribution centers to report back to the manufacturers, so the manufacturers can have a better idea of what their products are that came into the district. So we tried to add that reporting requirement to help the manufacturers really hone what their inventory is. Next slide, slide 28. So this is also in regard to reporting. The manufacturers, or some of the manufacturers, asked that the products be grouped so that more than one product can be reported as a line item. And we have some history with this kind of reporting. We have a reporting requirement for architectural coating manufacturers. They have fees and reporting requirements annually. And initially, we did allow grouping, so multiple products could be grouped on one line. What we found was that when we had audits and manufacturers tried to unwind this grouping, they were not able to. So it also was a challenge for us for enforcement if we found a product in the field, to confirm that it was actually reported to us. If it's reported in a group, we had no way to confirm that. So grouping, we did not have a lot of success for, so we are going to want the products reported individually. Then allow and Nicole already mentioned this, for the quantity and emission report for aerosols, to allow them for weight percent. We were okay with that. We're fine with having weight percent VOC and the annual sales to be reported in pounds instead of gallons. Slide 29. This is a comment we received regarding test methods. We put in two requirements, one for equivalent test method. So if there is a new chemistry that came in and the test methods that we already have in the rule, there is no method that works, that you are allowed to come in and present an equivalent test method, which will be approved through our executive office and CARB and EPA. So we do want to leave that in for emerging technologies and in case there's any issues with the test methods. And then we had one for multiple test methods. So if your product comes in and there's a series of VOC tests that are run on it, a failure of any one of these tests constitute a violation. We are looking at that language. That language is in many of our VOC rules, and it works well. In this instance, there's so many different types of products and so many different test methods. We're gonna evaluate that language, and so our draft will come out with a slight revision of that. And in addition to that, as we've been discussing all the different test methods and the type of products, we're going to develop a guidance document. We're going to work with our lab to come up with a way so when your product comes in, that you'd understand, what test method we would direct that product to. Again, because there's so many different type of products, we want to make it clear that if we received a pipe cement, that we wouldn't run it by method 24, that we'd run it by 316A. So we're going to develop a flow chart for the easy and obvious tests. And where there are certain gray areas, we're going to probably have a dialogue about how our lab would address those products. And we don't think we're going to have this developed before our board hearing in October, but we still have we'll develop a draft guidelines and we'll send it out to the working group. And if we want to have some working group meetings afterwards, just sort of vet this guidance document, we'd welcome that, and we'll welcome the feedback. Okay, slide number 30. We've had some concerns about VOC limits and effective dates. So you'll see in the draft that we have delayed some of these effective dates. We have already delayed some from the original proposal. So we're trying to address stakeholders' concerns there. The comments come in that VOC limits are not feasible for various categories. Again, where we set the limits were largely based on the survey, where we thought it looked feasible, where we have stakeholders coming in saying that they think this future limit is feasible. We are considering higher limits for pipe cements. So the CPVC, PVC, and the transition is something that we're evaluating. There's concern there with the ASTM method and building codes. So that's one area that we're considering raising the VOC limits. This comment is that rule applicability and compliance should be determined by use and not be the manufacturer's responsibility. So rule compliance, when we're out in the field, is largely determined on how a product is marketed. So we will our inspectors will be out in the field, they will look at the label, and based on the way it's marketed, they will determine which VOC category it falls into and what the limit should be. And that is definitely on the manufacturer. That's how they market their product. If they market it for more than one category, and there's a category that's of lower use, and they have the higher VOC limit of the product, you will probably hear from our inspectors. But if we find a product that is marketed in a compliant way, but it's being used maybe by a manufacturing facility, used in a way that that product was not intended, that would not be the manufacturer's responsibility. That would be the end user's responsibility, unless it was found that the manufacturer was recommending that product for that non-compliant use. Then we could trace it back to the manufacturer. Okay, so from there, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Barbara Radline.
All right, I'm going to take it home. The big presentation. Okay, I've got 2 slides on CEQA. So for the uninitiated, CEQA stands for the California Environmental Quality Act. It was state law that was adopted in 1970, and its purpose is to inform government decision makers and the public about potential significant effects of projects, and if we have significant effects, how to identify ways to avoid or reduce those adverse impacts. If there are significant impacts, then of course we have to require feasible alternatives and apply mitigation measures to prevent significant environmental damage. And even if after we do all that, we still have significant effects, we have to disclose to the public why a project was approved. CEQA applies to projects undertaken by public agencies such as the AQMD, and in particular, when we adopt, amend, or rescind rules, we're required to comply with CEQA. It's considered a discretionary approval to go forward with a rule amendment, so like 1168. And so we're considered the lead agency for this project. We have oversight and the legal responsibility to prepare the appropriate CEQA documentation, to circulate it for public review, to respond to comments, and to give it to our governing board for consideration and hopefully their approval and certification. So for this project, the proposed amended rule is the project subject to CEQA. When we evaluated all the myriad of changes that are proposed, we couldn't find anything that would have a significant impact to the environment, which is great. That's always a good thing. We decided to prepare a 30-day draft environmental assessment, which is equivalent to a negative declaration when no significant impacts are identified. Just a quick note for the AQMD, we operate under a certified regulatory program under CEQA. So our CEQA documents, we call them environmental assessments. So a negative dec equivalent is like a 30-day environmental assessment, which means that we circulate the document for a 30-day comment period. Because we didn't find any significant impacts for any of the environmental topic areas, an analysis of alternatives and mitigation measures are not required. When we do a 30-day EA, it's basically 2 chapters. The first chapter is project description, describes a lot of the things that Nicole and Heather took you through. And then chapter 2 is the environmental checklist, where we go topic by topic and evaluate the potential impacts on the environment. We released the 30-day EA yesterday for the public review period, which will end at 5 p.m. on Friday, September 15th. If you notice on slide 35, it's got the wrong date. It says September 14th. CEQA comments are due on September 15th. So as long as you get them in by 5 p.m., you'll be good. And then once we get those comments, and we'll prepare, we include the comment letters in an appendix, and we prepare responses, and we include them at the end of the document, and we convert the draft EA to a final EA, and it's included as part of the governing board package that will be considered by the governing board on, I believe, October 6th.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Appreciate that. Sorry about the date. Okay, next up here, these are our contacts. Nicole, who did the presentation. CEQA, while you've met Barbara here, her specialist who actually worked on the document is actually right over there. She's taking in some of the questions that people may be submitting by email, which reminds me, Paul, why don't we flash that email address for those that are on the web casting and care to submit a question You can submit it to that address that currently we have on screen. Diane will take in that question and we'll hopefully be able to respond to it. Okay, let's go back to the context there for a second. Okay, and then of course we've got Shah at the end of the table there, and that's his address. I believe we'll be sending out a socioeconomic analysis very soon, and that will be on the same webpage as you've located the copies of the rule and the draft staff report. Okay, tag, next one. Oh, Vera's in control here, okay. All right, so some dates. We're seeking to get any comments that you may have on the currently released rule that's out there right now, or even any comments that you may have on the presentation that we gave today by the 31st. This enables us to get to our board for setting this project on the 1st. CEQA comments, again, as Barbara noted, it's a day later than we initially had estimated, so it's now on the 15th. That'll happen to be the same day that we're taking this to our stationary source committee. This is where our board actually meets in a smaller grouping, but one that kind of can focus a little bit more on some of the details of what we're proposing to the board. This will be the package that we would intend, the package that we take to that committee will be the package that we intend to take to our board. So it may look slightly different than what you're looking at today due to some of the comments that we've already received that I believe Nicole highlighted already, and then some of the things we may receive today. And then finally, take it to our board for a final public hearing and consideration for the approval of the proposed changes on October 6th. Okay, so again, Paul, let's show that email address. All right, we're going to open it up now for public comments. We'll just allow people to come up freely. Please introduce yourself, what organization you're with, and we'll be taking notes, so it's not like we're ignoring you when you make your comments. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Doug Raymond. I'm here for the NAA, the National Aerosol Association. I have three quick issues. First one is the wording for F1A little I. I still don't believe this is clear. And I understand, Heather, what you're talking about where it says regulated products subject to the provision of this rule, but then it says as well as. So if you were not present at this meeting and you weren't listening to the thing, it says as well as the CARB CPR may be displayed. So the way I read that is all regulated products plus all consumer products have to be regulated, whether they're regulated or not. So maybe just inserting the word as well as regulated CARB consumer products would take care of it, because when you put the as well in, I think you're getting rid of the original regulated products. My second question is, will there be a breakout of what the 1.4 tons of emissions are? You know, where you're getting each bit of it? I know that that was in past ones, but I didn't know if you've redone that.
So in the preliminary draft staff report, we do have a
Okay.
table that breaks that down.
Okay, I'll look at that. And then my last comment, Heather, is for the foam sealants. They're in an aerosol, and you don't have a test method, so if you just dropped them, the issue would go away.
But our lab already has this great experimental method they're looking forward to doing. I'm pretty sure the lab is here hiding under a table somewhere.
That's it. And lastly, the NAA would like to thank you for reinstating the aerosol exemption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Rita.
Good morning. Thank you guys for the outreach that you've done on this rule, sending out the emails, sending out the notifications and the presentations. We're really appreciative of that. Also, I'm hopeful that the test method issue will be resolved. As you know, we've submitted comments that the test method for UVEB thin films should be included. That's ASTM 7767. And just for, I think you've heard me introduced myself before, but I'm the Director of Environmental Affairs for RadTech International. And RadTech is a nonprofit organization representing the UV, EB, and LED industry. We have over 800 member companies nationwide, and our chapter is North America, but we also have chapters in Asia, Europe, China. So we do have some products in this category. I believe most of them, like I mentioned to the staff, fall under the medical device category. Therefore, they would be covered under the exemption. And we are supportive of the equivalent test method section. I haven't seen the language on the multiple test method requirement, which is a big concern for us for enforcement purposes when there's more than one method out there. I appreciate the guidance document idea. However, I would be very concerned without having board purview on that process. I'm not sure what it's going to look like, and it would be like an after the fact exercise, and the board would not be aware of that. So it would sort of be like an, you know, for lack of better term, an underground rulemaking activity. I mean, I'm sure you're going to try to stick to the spirit of the rule and what the board adopted, but without having seen the language or how the process is going to play out, we're not sure about that, how that would play out, especially for test methods. And again, let me reiterate that we would want ASTM 7767 to be specifically included in the test method section, as you have done for cyanoacrylates and thick film adhesives. We think our method should also be included for our category of coatings. On the issue of the reporting requirements, we believe they are too burdensome, and we believe they are unnecessary for the category of products that we represent, which would be very low VOC materials. The board had a lot of discussion on this issue as part of the 219 amendment. And 219 originally proposed reporting for every few years, like in this rule. Then the proposal was modified to increase the frequency of the reporting, like in this rule. And then our industry was being required to report, I believe it was once a year. The board felt that a one-time form would be sufficient to address the staff's concerns with 219, which were pretty much the same as what the concerns outlined here are. And I understand that you want to have some sort of an inventory, but some of these concerns are just not applicable to us. For example, you have on slide 27, one of the bullets states that you had a 4.1 tons per day versus 10.5 tons per day estimated from the survey. So the emissions went up dramatically. In our case, if our industry were to grow and the product usage were to grow, this would go the other way. It would get you emission reductions because most of our materials are less than 50 grams per liter. And as a matter of fact, the reason that we had challenges with the test method is because we couldn't find a test method that would accurately measure these very low levels of VOCs. So we think that we are in line with your goal of promoting the low VOC products, but some of this language really steps on that effort. And what you're creating is a disincentive for these products to come into the basin. Now, this rule is different from other source-specific rules that we deal with, such as graphic arts, which is our biggest market, in that this puts the reporting requirements on the manufacturers. You have administrative requirements here that have nothing to do with emission reductions. You have labeling requirements, you have quality emission report requirements, you have additional reporting requirements, and there's a cost to that, and it's going to the manufacturer now. I understand that 1113 was sort of the first rule, and along with its companion 314 that brought in these overly prescriptive data collection requirements for manufacturers, and we are absolutely not in support of that. We were not in support during 1113. We were definitely not in support under 314, and we have had a consistent position of not imposing these overly burdensome administrative requirements on industry that does not get you emission reductions and actually acts as a disincentive for the lower VOC products to come in. So we think that we would support an exemption for these lower VOC materials, and we think rather than setting the limit at 20, which I'm appreciative that you're considering that and you have some language in the rule that already offers some relief, but we think they should be exempt from the reporting requirements. And we think that you should set the limit at 50 until 2021, which then your limits go to 20. That's the lowest limit in the category for wood flooring adhesives. So we don't think it makes sense to have a 20 gram per liter limit now when there's only one category in the rule that will have that limit, and it won't be until 2021. You know, it would be difficult to make an argument, you know, set the limit higher than the lowest limit in the rule. So we would consider the 20 when you get to 2021. And again, there's only one category in the rule. So we'll continue to provide comments, and we welcome the dialogue, and we hope we can resolve these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. That's an interesting idea. So the idea that the de minimis would go up to 50 after the 2021, when that other lower category, it definitely would be an incentive for sure. One thing I wanted to add, you know, about the multiple test method, yes, as we noted, we are looking at a rework of that section. And in order to move things along, I think what we'll do is we'll send those out to the, you know, to the working group to get their feedback more sooner than later, so we can ensure that's in shape for the committee. So, Bill Lamar. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good.
Great. I'm Bill Lamar. I'm the Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance, and I only have a process comment, and that is I noticed that you all have about 6 of your slides that are dedicated to key concerns, key stakeholder concerns. And it occurred to me that looking at your schedule, those individuals who have comments and raise key concerns, maybe some of them are here today, if they're going to make those concerns known to the governing board, the October hearing is going to be at the Millennium Biltmore in downtown Los Angeles, and they're not going to have an opportunity to come here, park for free, and avail themselves of the customary protocol here. So you might make that known to everyone, even those who are not here, of this change. And it may be something for these folks to include in their comment letters to extend the hearing time to the November board meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Just a point of clarification, the slides that did have the stakeholder concerns, what we were doing was demonstrating how we resolve those, or at least attempted to resolve those to the best of our abilities. So
No, I understand that, but even picking up on Rita's recent comments, apparently,
Sure.
RadTech still has some concerns over this, and
Okay.
Having attended some of the working group meetings, I know that there are other concerns as well. So
Great, thanks.
Hi, my name is Amber Caluso. I'm from the Port of Los Angeles. As an end user, I would like to point out that although you guys are putting the labeling of VOCs on the containers, a lot of manufacturers have been taking the VOC content out of the SDSs and putting them on technical data sheet, product data sheets, and oftentimes it's very difficult to find those. So if we could put in the rule to make sure that they maintain the VOC content in the SDSs, that would be very helpful in our end users to be able to maintain our Rule 109 VOC record keeping. Secondly, for marine use, oftentimes there are very few products for marine products for adhesives. So oftentimes we would have to use something that might be marketed for non-marine, for marine use, and most of those are water-based products, and it's very hard to use a water-based product in a marine environment. So for example, we have to put non-skid pads on the decks. So that would possibly be counted as top trim adhesive, but because we have to use something that's more water-based, those come apart in like a year. So it becomes then a safety hazard for us. So there was a way to maybe make a category specifically for a marine adhesive instead of combining it with automotive? That would be helpful for us to try to make sure that we are in compliance in using these products rather than manufacturers just not really making them for us. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Amber.
Hello, my name is Gene Lopez. I'm with Seidner's Collision Center, also an end user, and I would have to concur with the previous speaker in that having the VOCs on a safety data sheet would be extremely helpful in our own record keeping. At this point, and I'm in the collision business, the body shop business, and we're currently not recording these VOCs, so that could become a concern for us if we should have to begin recording the VOCs from the adhesives and the sealants and the sealant primers that we're using. It would be very helpful to have that information on the SDS. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gene. Okay, anybody else? Bill?
Oh, good morning. Bill Pierce, the Boeing Company. Just had as I was going through the draft rule, I just had a minor comment, and I was curious why the definition for toxic air contaminants seems to be different than the definition that's used in 1401, which I think would be the more common definition to be used among all the rules. So it's just a comment. Just
We
curious
used
about
the
that.
definition from 1402. Turns out there's a different definition from 1401 to 1402, and 1402 is a more updated one, so we were directed to use that definition.
Okay, I guess I'll have to look at that, because I thought 1401 was just going through its rulemaking, so.
It is.
It is, I mean, it is right now.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
Thanks for the reminder. We'll go talk to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, my name is Will Lorenz with General Coatings, and I'm also part of the Roof Coating Manufacturers Association. And one, I appreciate the comments with regard to the VOC calculations and the section with regard to the any kind of category, and you're looking at that again. I think we thought that the initial language didn't seem to fit real well, and we hope that you guys can modify that so it's a little bit more usable for us. Obviously, we prefer like a method 24, but it has its issues, and we have issues with 313 and its applicability and reproducibility, but that's probably a different subject. I did also want to comment on the category with regard to, give me a second, clear, paintable, and immediately water-resistant category. We find that product had initially been sort of, in our mind, unregulated, and now it sort of was proposed under a 250 gram limit. We think that there's no products that can meet that requirement, and that we suggest that the limit should be at 380. And that at this point in our letter to you folks, to Nicole, we were suggesting that 380 be the one effective 1/1/19, and that proposing the 250 gram be set forth on 1/1/2023.
Sure, thanks, Will. You know, yes, I know there's been a disagreement between that, but again, interpretations are interpretation of that particular
Sure.
category. You know, I just think that those that are manufacturing that should feel lucky because there wasn't any enforcement efforts, you know, taken out to target those. But we did recognize your concern with that, as you can see from the rule. We do say upon adoption, we would accept the 380 level.
Okay.
However, there is a point where we're just gonna have to be technology forcing to get them to work on alternatives to that to get down to a 250. We can discuss about whether we want to move that out. If the 2021 is a challenge for the further date, I think we can discuss that. But for us, it's a problem when we start taking these categories that in the mind of EPA and under our SIP commitments, we now start backing out. That's just going to be more reductions we have to seek elsewhere. So our feeling is, you know, that this is already a category that should have been already at those levels already. So there's going to be just some work that needs to get done. I'm going to take, but I think we are trying to give some ease so there isn't an immediate panic.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you. And we're always happy to have the dialogue as to, you know, what's feasible and participate in a tech assessment, things that could get you the best information there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Will. Oh, sorry, slow writer. You know, I was raised by nuns, so, you know, they want my handwriting to be pretty neat, so I have to take my time. Okay, any other comments? Going once, going twice. Okay, again, this has been webcast. Yes?
Nothing on the email.
Oh, Diana, I'm sorry. A little refresh? We did this one time, and the guy doing the computer didn't refresh it, and so we closed it out, and then afterwards he came up to me and says, oh, I got a couple questions. I was like, what happened? He's, I hit the refresh button. Lesson learned. Okay, so thank you all for attending. Have a lovely day, and we look forward to your continuing comments again until the 31st, so we can lock this down. Thank you very much.